This is The Future Of, where experts share their vision of the future and how their work is helping shape it for the better.
I'm Jessica Morrison. Through the extraction of vital resources, mining is essential to the existence of our physical infrastructure, like buildings and power grids, and modern technology, like mobile phones. But now, with increasing calls to adopt more sustainable practices, what will mining operations look like in the future? In this episode, I was joined by Professor Michael Hitch, the Head of Curtin University's WA School of Mines, Minerals, Energy and Chemical Engineering. The school has for several years ranked as the world's second best mining school in the QS World University rankings by subject. We chatted about how the resources sector is transitioning to the circular economy model, the need for mining companies to consider their social licence to operate, as well as Michael's own personal story from industry to academia. If you'd like to find out more about this research, you can visit the links provided in the show notes. This episode was recorded remotely due to COVID.
Michael, in recent years, there's been a lot of discussion about how the resources sector needs to move to a circular economy model. What do you think the main benefits of this model are, and where is the sector at with transitioning to it?
Thanks, Jess. The circular model is an alternative to the linear model that we're accustomed to, which is produce, use, and dispose. The idea of circularity is that we produce, we use, but we never really dispose. Or if we dispose in a way that the manufactured good can be disaggregated or pulled apart and put back into the production stream. Where it fits into the resources sort of sector and the product flow is the idea about waste. And in mining and in the resources sector in general, we produce a lot of waste. And we call it waste, but really it's just broken rock. And we either have to put it into dumps or ultimately into tailings ponds. So the idea is that in the circular model is that waste actually has value. It's no longer something that we call waste. It's basically a production byproduct. And if we can upvalue that to a point, even that it's worth more than the material that was produced generating that waste, that's circularity. The circular model as we know it is actually a very static one, that there's really very little room for economic growth. But when we start upvaluing waste, we actually can start growing economies, and it's a much more dynamic but also more holistic view. At the end of the day, it's about resource utilization and resource stewardship. That if we're going to go in and we're going to disturb the land, we're going to take everything. We're not just going to take the good stuff, but we're going to find a way to extract value from everything that we actually take out of the ground, including the material that generally doesn't have economic value.
Which mining companies exhibit the best environmentally sustainable practices in your mind?
Boy, that's hard to say. You know, the big end of town, as it's known here in Western Australia, do a really, really good job. They have programs and they have specialists that are really focused on this idea. The idea of sustainability, of course, is looking at biophysical integrity. It's about economic sufficiency for as many stakeholders as possible. But most importantly, it's social well-being, to make sure that the affected communities are not affected in a particularly negative way, and in fact, that they actually benefit from the development of the mining operation. So, I refer to the big end of town for sure, but there are fantastic examples of mid-tier and even small companies that are really, really doing a good job in the sustainability part.
What are some things, just examples of what some of these companies, whether they're big end of town or the mid to small tier companies are doing? What are some examples of things that they're producing from the byproduct of mining?
Well, one of the really cool things that's happening, and it's happening around BHP at this particular time, is they're looking at their tailings. And tailings are those things or that material that is produced once you've extracted the mineral of interest. So you've taken the metallic stuff out, in this case, in nickel, then you have effectively sand that you're putting into an impoundment. And these tailings are chemically neutral, so if they just sit there, they're not going to cause anybody any problem. and they're not going to have a negative effect on the environment per se. But the really kind of cool part of this is that that sandy material is reactive when it is in contact with CO2. So if the particle, the sand particle, is in contact with CO2, it changes its chemistry. It changes from CO2 to a carbonate, which is a mineral form of carbon, and mineral form of CO2 effectively. And it's thermodynamically stable for about 100,000 years. So in effect, the waste product that's being produced from nickel mining could eventually become a product that sequesters CO2, that qualifies for carbon offset credits, and it also can be turned into ultimately building products or animal feed or food fillers or paint thickeners. So it has three benefits, actually four benefits, I suppose. It sequesters CO2. You can produce an alternate product. You can generate CO2 offset credits. And your mining operation has a much smaller footprint because the tailings that you're producing don't just sit there. Then, in fact, you'll be able to use them for alternate purposes. So, again, this is a great sustainability story. It's a perfect example of circularity because, again, waste all of a sudden has economic value and social value and environmental value. So it covers the three legs of the sustainability stool, right? Which is economic sufficiency, biophysical integrity, and social well-being.
If we're thinking about the future of mining, I mean, mining, if we're thinking just in WA or even in Australia, sometimes has a bit of a bad name, gets a bit of a bad rep, right? But is sustainability the only way that it can have a viable future?
Again, it depends on how you define sustainability, right? Sustainability as a term has become a bit diffuse, would be a word, and I would put that in air quotes. That, of course, the original definition that we're all accustomed to came out of the Brundtland Report and United Nations work that they did back in the early to mid-90s in a report called Our Common Future. And that definition that we know is basically being able to carry on what we do today without sacrificing the needs of future generations. There's a next sentence to that people don't really want to talk about, and that is if it's economically feasible to do so. But it just conveniently, that doesn't seem to get mentioned by some. But the mining sector in Western Australia in particular is very good at their sustainability practice. You know, we have challenges, of course, with local communities, but again, it's about developing a platform which local communities can thrive, whether that's small business development or alternate business development that will exist and carry on once the mine has closed. We're really fortunate here, again, particularly in the Pilbara, where these mines are very long-lived. And in many cases, those communities become very dependent on mining. But it's really important to make sure that those communities are prepared for when mining ends. So alternate business, again, transformative business, and industrial activity is really, really important.
Really fascinating. I'm from a mining town myself in WA, and certainly something close to home when you talk about that and longevity of the towns. You touched on earlier social sustainability. So obviously we know sustainability, as you said, doesn't just refer to the environment, it also refers to people. You've written a lot about the importance of companies needing a social license to operate. What is this license and why is it important going into the future?
Social license is a metaphor. There's really no such thing as a social license. Nobody runs up to you and gives you a piece of paper and says, here's your license, congratulations. What it is it's a way of describing a relationship. And it's about trust. It's about a trust that's built between a mining company or any industrial proponent, for that matter. It could be a shoe factory for all it cares, right? But it's that relationship between the industrial proponent and the affected communities or communities of interest. And it is this trust. The way I like to describe it is, what if you change the word social license to love? I've achieved love. or we're working towards love. And it really, really changes the notion of what social license is. So social license effectively is acceptance. It's acceptance of the various roles and responsibilities each party has to play in the relationship. It's about being clear and truthful in communication. It's about the industrial proponent bringing the communities of interest into the tent, effectively bringing them into the planning process, bringing them into operations to be able to be clear and transparent. But it's also about the industrial proponent of being clear and honest when something goes wrong. If something goes wrong and there's an accident of any sort, which happens from time to time, that they're communicating with the community in a timely and effective manner. So it's like any relationship. It's like a relationship that you may have with your partner. If anybody's withholding something, or if anybody's being untruthful or not forthcoming, then the quality of that relationship deteriorates. So it's like love and it's like trust, that social license takes a lot of steps and a lot of patience to approximate. You never really achieve it, I believe, but you get closer.
Everyone's dry.
you kind of get warmer, right?
Yeah.
It takes a lot of time and a lot of patience and a lot of hard work to get to anything that kind of you can say, we're doing a good job, but it's very quick to lose. It's really quick to lose trust in these sort of circumstances, and it's almost impossible to regain. So once you blow it, you really blow it big time.
What challenges do you think developing nations specifically face when it comes to this transition, when we're talking about the social license or the relationships with people, etc.?
Boy, I've traveled a lot in my career. I hate to tell you how many countries, but it's definitely three figures. And I've definitely seen the good, the bad, and the ugly of what mining can do. And since I started my career back in 1984, I suppose, the world has changed. We've had the advent of the internet. We have a lot more social activism. We have a lot more NGO activity and ENGOs in particular, both at the local level, but also at kind of what I call the supranational level, the big guys like Sierra, et cetera, and World Wildlife Fund and so forth. So these have all kind of come to being. What in developing nations, the first part of, I think, of the discussion is governance systems, that the nation has to have a governance system that lays out the rules and responsibilities of perhaps international companies coming into their country and how they're going to interact with local communities. And we see that social license and social behavior or corporate behavior is far more effective in countries that do have that governance platform. It's a policy issue, really, more than anything else. But it's also about the company themselves. In Canada, for example, if a Canadian mining company is going overseas to work, they're held by the standards of the Canadian law and Canadian policy. So if they go in and they're a bunch of crazy cowboys, then they will be held accountable in Canada against Canadian standards. So that's a really cool thing, and I think that's really important. And in Australia, we have some of the highest environmental standards in the world. And as long as we're adhering to those and we respect those and we're operating at those high levels, everything should be pretty good.
Now, let's talk about your journey, Michael. You started in industry first. So what made you want to move to research?
Boy.
Like to ask the hard questions.
I mean, that's a fabulous question. I had a weak moment. No. I was really fortunate. I've had an absolutely amazing career, and I owe it to a lot of people. A lot of people had faith in me. A lot of people mentored me. I guess at the right time, at the right place. What I often say to people, and particularly people that are, going through their career journey, starting off, for example, as I say, if someone offers you an opportunity, the first words out of your mouth is yes. Never say no. Just yes to everything, because it builds up your toolbox. So I was really fortunate, again, from being a field geologist to being in operations to being in corporate and then running my own companies to being an investment banker to being a hired gun by other investment funds to go in and fix other companies. So again, it took me all over the world. It helped me build this really cool toolbox. When I was about 42, I was kind of in a position where I could semi-retire, and I wanted to give something back. So I decided to do a PhD part-time, which was insane. I would never recommend that to anybody, especially if you have two young kids and you have to have a very patient partner for sure. And then I started off all over again as the lowest of the low junior level academic, and I built my way up through that. But really the notion was to give something back to young people. Again, I had great opportunities. I had great mentors. People really helped me along the way. And I really felt compelled to help young people in the same way that others helped me.
I love that. That's a really, really nice story. Really lovely. Look, in your opinion, as the head of Curtin University's WA School of Mines, Minerals, Energy and Chemical Engineering, what role is Western Australia going to play in this new sustainable resource future, or what role are we already playing?
WA punches well above its fighting weight. We produce most of the material that is going to be required to build the infrastructure of the future. And this is kind of the really important part we have to focus on, is that the materials that we produce, the iron ore, the specialty metals, nickel, again, the lithiums and all these other sort of things are the things that are important in, again, building that infrastructure. Right now, we have infrastructure that was basically designed in the 1950s and 60s, and we're starting to see it crumble. It was probably only designed to live for 50 or 60 years. And we've extended it to 100 years, for example, to make it work. Probably not that long, but certainly a long time. So we have a lot of corrosion, rebar inside of cement, and it starts kind of limiting our societal's growth. If we're talking about this decarbonized energy transition, it's going to require a completely different suite and, I hate the phrase, but out-of-the-box thinking in terms of the infrastructure that we're going to require in order to make that happen. WA produces that. So by far, we're leading the way in the production of what we call critical materials. I move away from kind of the list that's provided out of Canberra because I think things like water is critical. I think sand is critical. So, I kind of move away from maybe the sexy metals to think about even the mundane stuff that is really, really important. So we do that really well here, remarkably well. What we also should be doing is taking that knowledge that we have, and we've developed the safest practice. We're good in the environmental stuff. We're really, really good at the social stuff here. Is starting to export that knowledge to places that need that extra push or need that extra help. And we have this intellectual capital that is something, a commodity unto itself, that we should be, again, pushing into lesser developed nations. I shouldn't say the word pushing, but certainly offering into lesser developed nations to help them improve their practice, to make sure that they're on a sustainable pathway going forward. So it's an amazing place to be. I am so happy to be here.
It is, it certainly is. Look, overall, how would you personally like our sustainable resource use and mining operations to look like in the future? Big question. But blue sky thinking.
If I could wave my magic wand, and again, I'd probably, there will be people with pitchforks and torches outside my window really, really soon. But for me, sustainable resource use is about mining what we need, not mining that is, economically advantageous because of market conditions, because we only have so much mineral endowment. And if we mine it all now, what are we going to mine in 50 years? So I'm kind of the mind that, if the world, and we need to get a handle on what are the resource needs to have a sustainable future. This is a big answer to a big question, right? If we know what the world's going to require in terms of steel, how much steel are we going to need in the next 25 years? Then we will mine and develop mines that will provide the iron ore to produce the steel for the next 25 years. That's what I believe. So we need to stage our mineral development. We can't develop it all now and just run rampant because we don't have power distribution. We don't have the human resources to operate all these things. So, and I think that if you start looking at cumulative impact in terms of environmental, social, and even economic, that's another issue that we have to start thinking about. It's one thing to look at a mining operation in its isolation, but if you look at 20, what is the difference? So again, we haven't really cracked that nut here in Australia on cumulative effect. But I think we need to look at our resource use, making sure that we're using all of the resource. And again, that's called material stewardship. And I think we really have to be thinking about that. We have to come up with alternate models of the materials that we are producing. For example, with iron ore, then why don't we get into, well, I call it metals leasing. So basically it's blockchain and supply chain management, where you're actually tracking that ton of iron ore all the way through. And that the person using the steel to manufacture something actually just buys the steel for a short, doesn't even buy the steel, they lease the steel. And then when the end of life for that product that was made from the steel is done, that product goes back to either the mining company or to the steel maker as scrap or recycled. And then basically it closes the circular economy as well. Again, long answer, big answer to a big question.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Michael, for chatting with me today. It's a really fascinating topic. Obviously, the mining and resources sector in WA, in Australia, and in parts of the world is just massive. Really thank you for your insight and expertise in this.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you very much, Jess.
You've been listening to The Future of, a podcast powered by Curtin University. If you've enjoyed this episode, please share it. And if you want to hear from more experts, stay up to date by subscribing to us on your favourite podcast app. Bye for now.